So today, in the light of Women's Day, we have world-renowned scientist in pancreatic research, Professor Minoti Apte from Ingham Institute of Applied Medical Research, who is doing groundbreaking discovery in this field. And being women, we would like to celebrate her work today. And I would like to welcome Professor Minoti Apte. Thank you, Minoti, for your time today for us and sharing your experience. For my first question, I would like to ask you is something about your career journey and what keeps you motivated still in the field, and how do you enter this field?
Thank you, Shadma. It's a privilege to be able to chat to you. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm joining you, which is Bijikul land, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I guess what I started with was not what I ended up with. So I did medicine. I was a medical graduate, and when I finished medicine, I wanted to be an ophthalmologist. But I think, as I mentioned before in one of my talks, what you plan is often not what life has in store for you. But so I came to Australia with my husband soon after I finished my internship. And then, as it turned out, because I was on a visa that restricted what I could do, I ended up doing a volunteer fellowship, if you like, in the pathology department at Royal Newcastle Hospital in Australia, and then was able to get a scholarship to do a master's by research. And that's how I fell into research, really. And my research for my master's was on alcoholic liver disease. So different from, obviously, the current work that I'm doing, but it was linked in terms of the job I got when we moved to Sydney, because there was a group doing alcoholic pancreatitis research, which is obviously pancreatic inflammation due to alcohol abuse. And so my previous experience with alcoholic liver disease was what actually got me the job in the first instance. That was a research assistant job. And then I did my PhD with the same group. So I'm an accidental researcher, fell into research, sort of.
Wow, that's so good to hear about how you started, and it could be motivation to a lot of us. So with that, I would like to ask you a piece of advice which you would have got as an early career researcher, which has brought to the place where we all dream of. And if you would like to highlight any advice for general researchers like us.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the one piece of advice that has really resonated with me was when I was very young, actually, from my grandmother, who said, when a door closes, there's always a window that opens. And for me, it turned out to be the case that when the door to clinical medicine sort of closed to me when we came to Australia, I was on the lookout for doing something with my time. And the opportunity presented itself in being able to be involved in a pathology research project. So that was my window, so to speak, of opportunity. So the advice would be that there are many times in a research career when something just doesn't work, when there's a lot of obstacles in the way, hurdles, challenges. But if one door seems to be closed, always keep an eye out for another window that will definitely be open, and walk through it, or climb through it, sort of. So that would be my advice. And the only other piece of advice, and which I don't think I need to tell too many ECRs or MCRs, is perseverance and persistence, because that's the only thing that gets us through. Lots and lots of disappointments are always around the corner in research and in many fields. And I think it's everywhere. If you persist and persevere, that's what gets you through.
I think it's really relevant at the time when COVID is still there, along with other challenges coming in personal, but as in a world as well. I think it's a really piece of light, that persistence, perseverance, and keeping hope, even if something's is not working for you. So thank you for that. I would like to ask, is there any specific work from your own it may be not as big as a world, but it is something which you would have achieved. Probably like we get a Western blot and we get so much happy. Anything which you look back and you still feel, wow, that was a good work, and was it very hard for you to achieve? So anything which you are proud of?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, immediately my mind will go back to what made our group famous around the world, which was the discovery and isolation of pancreatic stellate cells. So I remember that happened over Christmas. And, my boss, my supervisor, I was doing my PhD at the time, and this was towards the end of my PhD. And we were discussing why the pancreas gets so much fibrosis due to alcohol, and nobody was working on that at the time. They were just saying it's an epiphenomenon of chronic inflammation. But in the liver, there was a lot of work being done on these cells called stellate cells. So we were wondering whether the same thing might happen in the pancreas, but nobody had actually looked. And so my supervisor at the time said, Minoti, I want pancreatic stellate cells by Christmas. And so, I started looking at ways and trying to get cues from the liver literature to see how we can try and get these cells, if they're there, out from the pancreas. So we stain for them and they seem to be there, but getting them out was just one of those things when you tried so many different things day in, day out, nothing worked. And then there came a day when I thought, I'm going to start from scratch rather than just copying, what was happening in the liver. And I made my own buffer right from scratch, because there was a particular buffer with and without sodium chloride that was used in the literature. And getting a commercial buffer, it wasn't working. So I made it right from scratch. And it was, I think, Christmas Eve or something. And there were those cells. There was something that was in that fuzzy band, which they talk about. So I got the cells out and I looked under an inverted microscope, and there were cells, and they looked very much like the liver stellate cells had been described. So I rang my colleague, because he was the one who had a way to cryospin the cells down, because he had to then stain them to prove that they were those cells, right? And he was working that evening, and he actually helped me cryospin that precious sample of stellate cells down, and then we were able to stain them. And it was a real eureka moment when we found those cells to be there. And, then basically that our work absolutely took off from there, because there were so many people. When I actually presented this work at one of the major gastro meetings, people stood up in the audience and said, "Oh, we've looked at these cells for a long time. We thought we didn't know what they were. Thank you for, being able to for showing us what these are." And then the field just exploded. So in 1998, there was us and there was a German group, and we didn't know that they were competing with us at the same time. They were looking for the same cells, and we beat them to press by a month. So, we became the pioneers. And then from 2 papers in 1998, now you get, at least 300 or 400 papers on stellate cells every year. So yeah, it's a big explosion in the field, and it's very satisfying to think that you've pioneered a whole new area of research in pancreatology, which is now actually turning into treatments, being able to be translated if you can target these cells. So yeah, that was a very satisfying moment, that's for sure.
Thank you for sharing this. It was inspiring, as well as it brings us to the same feeling where the researcher like us starts, and to see you at that position is that really, of course, your discoveries are amazing, and we are.
I mean, certainly that's where my persistence came up. But there's also a little bit of luck involved and a little bit of God's mercy. Everything comes together eventually, doesn't it, to make something work or not? So have to be grateful for everything.
That's how the good people and the great people talk, I would say. I would just try to, it's less luck, but more efforts and more wisdom from you. With that note, I would like to understand, as we know that we go into the lab and there's continuous experiments, continuous writing and brainstorming, then what keeps you sane? What do you turn to when the moment gets like, I can't do this thing anymore, I want to do something else?
Yeah, and that's what I always say to people, that you have to have a hobby, something that distracts you, takes you completely away from the rigors of science and, the demands of your work life. And my hobby was Indian classical dancing. So, I only started very late in life, really. Normally people start when they're in primary school or something. I started only when I got to Australia, and that too, even when we first came to Sydney. And it's just, those 2 hours of getting out of the house on a Saturday, leaving everything behind, just leaving your cares behind, and have that 2 hour of exercise, something that I really enjoyed, was what kept me sane through a lot of the times. Because you really, as you say, sometimes it gets too much, it can get a bit overwhelming. So just making that time for yourself, whether you do exercise or do anything else, but it's very critical, and especially for women, because, we are not only scientists, and we are mothers, and we are wives, and we're daughters-in-law and daughters, and we have a lot of responsibilities upon us in the house all the time. So making that little bit of time for yourself, and of course, having a really understanding partner who will also help you within having that time to yourself is very important, I think. And even if you're not married, I think you still need to have that special time away from all the, the responsibilities of work. I think that's the only thing that can keep you sane. Otherwise, just go completely mad.
And we are like a highly emotional, highly intellectual creatures.
Yes.
More sensitive. With that note, I would like to come to my last question, and especially in the event of Women's Day. Like, how do you feel? Is it any different to be a woman scientist in the field? Was there any specific challenges you would have faced? And what advice would you like to give people like me or any other younger girls who want to establish themselves in the field?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, well, firstly, for women scientists, it's always been challenging. At least now there are a lot more support system. There's much more awareness. Every institution and organization is putting effort into equity, diversity, and inclusion. So there are a few more support systems hopefully available in all organizations in terms of flexible work and things like that for women scientists. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think society is now coming to the notion that it's not just women who should be caregivers, whether it's caregivers for children or for their elders. It's, it should be shared equally. Whether that happens in day-to-day life is a question, but at least there's now awareness amongst the educated people that this needs to happen. And then the advice I would give to younger people is that no matter which generation you belong to, there are challenges for women. There have always been challenges, and we try and overcome them as best we can, right? So I think the main thing is, firstly, pick something that you're really interested in doing. I always say to anybody who does an RA, a research assistant job with us, if they want to do a PhD, I always say, make sure that this is what you're interested in. Because if you're not, then that long haul will become very, very unsatisfying, right? So you have to pick something that you've got a real interest in. And then if you really want to succeed, then you need to bite off more than you can chew, and chew like crazy. There's no two ways about it. You just have to take on all the challenges that are thrown at you and do the best you can with them. And again, coming back to the persistence and perseverance thing, because nothing works like persistence. People might have all the talent in the world, but if they don't work hard at it, eventually in the long haul, they're not going to succeed. It's talent, your individual efforts, but the persistence that comes from it. And the other thing I would say is that surround yourself with mentors who are really going to help you, who are going to look out for your well-being, and keep those connections as much as you can, and always acknowledge the shoulders that you stand on, because nobody succeeds on their own. In science particularly, it's always going to be some teamwork. And so even though I always feel that maybe it's my name that is out there, but behind me was that system that helped me succeed. And I will always acknowledge my supervisors and, who helped me along the way and encouraged me to be what I can be. And of course, never forget your partner or your family who support you all the time as well. So there's a few things that I would ask the young researchers to, and whether they be male or female, to consider these points if they can.
Thank you, Minoti. And with the mantras of persistence, as well as finding your interest and then working hard on it, and also invest in finding the best mentor. With this mantra, I am Shadma Fatima from Indian Institute of Postdoc Association, and presenting you our very beloved Professor Minoti Apte. Thank you. Thank you, Minoti. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shadma. Bye-bye.